there's really nothing to do and not enough time in the day to do it all. And it's true. I'm never bored for a moment.
Thank you for joining us on our next segment of SHIPS, which stands for Ships, History, Influence, and Power series. My name is Amy Bachari, and I'm the Education Director at the Steamship Historical Society. And today we're going to be talking about deck games and leisure at sea. What do you do when you're on a ship, for however many days you happen to be at sea, depending on what time you traveled? I guess it would depend on where you're going, how long you're on board.
I mean, it's really part of the full experience as a kid. Deck games are strictly, one component of your running around the ship exploring experience. I mean, the bigger thing as a kid is to be on the ship and know that all of the signs don't relate to you. So if it says first class, that means go and explore. It doesn't mean don't enter here, or cabin class, don't enter here. I mean, that's what it was to me. I was very fortunate to live in a household where my father was a teacher. He taught in the Great Neck school system on Long Island. And because he was an academic, he would apply for Fulbright scholarships. And Fulbright scholarships enabled the family, which consisted of myself, my brother, my older sister, and my folks, to travel domestically as well as internationally. And during that period, which was mostly in the 1960s, after spending some time in Berkeley, California as only a 6-year-old, he applied during the summer of 1961 to teach at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu. And my parents made the decision to take us first by DC-6 from Oakland Airport to Honolulu, which in 1961 was an arduous journey of about 10 hours on a prop plane. That was not a lot of fun. If any of you remember the TV show Sky King with its droning of a plane, that was 10 hours of that. And we arrived in Honolulu for a 10-week, not a holiday for my dad, but for the rest of us, it was a holiday. And my folks made the decision to book a ship to return to Berkeley. Fortunately, my father booked the President Cleveland, which was an intermediate P2 converted troop ship that came out of the plans for troop ships in World War II. Modest in size, American President lines. President Cleveland was about 21,000 tons, had 2 classes, first class and economy class. And because my father was traveling on the government and the Fulbright scholarship money that he was allowed, we were booked into the economy class, which was probably less than what tourist class became or had been in earlier times and during the 60s. Our cabin for my brother, my 4-year-old brother and myself and my dad in the male dormitory, it was a dormitory cabin that slept 8 snoring, hairy, loud men that kept us up almost every evening, while my mother and my sister stayed in a women's dormitory in economy class, deep within the ship. So we set sail from Honolulu with all of the fanfare that departures of that era allowed, which included the streamers attaching the ship to the pier with the Aloha Tower as a backdrop. I mean, it's a vivid memory that has remained in my brain since that time. I remember sitting on a freight hatch as we were departing, and it was a very exciting moment for a 6-year-old kid to experience, having the nucleus of the family there, but talking with my mom was able to give me free rein, understanding I wasn't the little kid that was going to climb a railing and jump off the ship. So to me, this was really going to be a first experience of being free in an environment where my folks didn't have to monitor me every moment of the day. And despite the limited area that economy class allowed us, I had free rein of the ship. As darkness began to fall and the ship was coming around Diamond Head on its way out of Honolulu Harbor, I was getting a little bit more of the same kind of illness feeling that I had from the flight out, and I was becoming horribly seasick. And I remember vividly watching lights at the base of Diamond Head. It was an odd thing to see that and not feeling well. It was just suddenly this wonderful experience of freedom turned into a horrible experience of terrible case of malware. I was as seasick could be. I didn't even know what sea legs were. And I regretted so terribly having the pineapple my folks had brought home earlier that day as a final celebratory taste of Hawaii. I couldn't eat dinner. I never made it down to the economy dining room. There was a wonderful Asian American steward that helped me out and put me on. There was a sunroom, and that's where I pretty much spent most of that night until my father got me back down into the bowels of the ship in our economy cabin. And we headed out on our 5-day voyage to San Francisco. So the first day dawned, we got out on deck, and the first thing my brother was omnipresent. My brother was always with me, a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, but as younger brothers can be. But he was my soulmate on most of these travels that we went on in the 60s. And the first thing we went about was exploring the ship with this newfound freedom. And what we found, much to our pleasure, was kind of like a jungle gym in a playground. There was a steep ladder that led up to the aft docking bridge on the President Cleveland. And that became our home when I could, when I wasn't battling seasickness. The aft docking bridge ran, from one side of the ship, from port to starboard. It had a ship's wheel in the middle for emergency use if needed, and it extended a little bit out over the sides of the ship. So it was just our little fantasy land. This aft docking bridge became our playground. We would run up and down this ladder. My father again applied for a Fulbright scholarship in 1966 to teach in Trieste, Italy. This time tourist class on the American Exporters Branson Line's Constitution, SS Constitution, from New York. It was supposed to be a 9-day crossing. So with some apprehension, I remember sailing day vividly on the west side of New York, Pier 84. Now I was 11 years old. It was September 1st, 1966. Again, it was tourist class of the 3-class ship. They had first cabin and tourists. And as it turned out, what we didn't know is as we were going south, paralleling the coast towards Cape Hatteras, where the ship would turn east towards the sunny southern route, we were approaching Hurricane Faith, which had been churning out of the Caribbean and had made a steep turn near Bahamas and came up the coast of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. And as it turned out, Hurricane Faith ran smack dab into the Constitution. And the Hurricane Faith stayed with us for the next 4 days. And 90% of the Constitution was sick, and I was the sickest. It was a cork in a bathtub experience. The ship, all 682 feet and 23 tons of it, was no match for Hurricane Faith. The waves were breaking over the bow of the ship. They had closed off all external access, so even the first day as we're at sea, we couldn't go outside. Ropes had been strung up. However, it defined the rest of the trip. What was a 9-day voyage across, and there was very little activities. Those first 2, 3, 4 days, nobody was going outside. You could not access the deck. By the 3rd, 4th day, I was beginning to feel better. I was finally eating. My mother was sitting in the Toronto main first class lounge. She happened to be talking to the leader of the Meyer Davis Orchestra. He was the trumpeter and he was the band leader. And he bemoaned to my mother the fact that at the height of the storm, he was sitting on a piano stool and the ship rolled heavily and he fell off the stool and his trumpet skittered along the deck and the stool followed it and smashed his trumpet. Now, I had started playing trumpet that summer, and I had my trumpet on board. And my mother, very gratefully to him, volunteered my trumpet. It became the backbone of the rest of my voyage. This leader of the Meyer Davis Orchestra would head up many of the children's activities. We would have the whistling through the crackers competition with the other kids. And even if I didn't perform first, he would award me the first place prize. We had a potato sack competition. I won every competition. And with those victories, he awarded me ashtrays. I got a small luggage bag. I got a pepper grinder, which I have to this day. All of the kinds of gifts that kids really need at the age of 11. And it made for such an incredibly wonderful experience once I was over my seasickness and I got my sea legs. As far as deck games, I was fortunate that I was a very good ping pong player. And my dad was also a ping pong player. I had now started to experience what it was like to go through the signs saying, do not enter first class or do not enter cabin class. But we did get into the first class table tennis tournament, and I won my age group. The other kids said, oh, that's the kid that won the table tennis tournament. And those were kids in first class. And I felt really good about that because I was the upshot from tourist class. So here we are. We've gone through this incredible experience. We've been through the storm. 90% of the ship was sick. And my mother gets an invitation from the leader of the Meyer Davis Orchestra. It was the final first class party. It was being held in the Boat and Bottle Bar. And as an 11-year-old kid, you always worry when you have to put on a bow tie. And this one really had me worried. She asked me to bring my mouthpiece to my trumpet. A lot of first class people, all in their jackets and suits and ties. And here's this tourist class kid experiencing this kind of environment for the first time. And my Meyer Davis band leader was the chief of ceremony, and the band was playing, people were dancing, and finally he goes into his story of what a horrible crossing this has been. We were in Hurricane Faith. It was a misery for so many of you. And I've got to tell you, he relates the story of his trumpet being smashed and how there was a trumpet on board the ship and how fortunate he was to get this trumpet to save the band. And we happen to have the young boy whose trumpet it is with us here today. He's here with his mother from tourist class, and the spotlight swings over to the side. I'm like frozen in the light. And he says, well, we happen to have him with us coming in from tourist class. Here he is, Alan Zamchick from Great Neck, New York. Let's bring him up now. I honestly believe to this day, this is why I can't do public speaking. It scared the living daylights out of me. But I very cautiously made my way to his little stage area. And he had me turn around, face the lights, which I couldn't see a thing. And he thanked me, shook my hand, and then he turned to me and said, Alan, how about you play a tune for us? And I had only been playing since April, May of '66, and it's September. I could hardly play the trumpet. But I did know how to play one song. And I took my horn from him, and I nervously put my mouthpiece in, and I turned to the collected crowd, and I played Taps, because Taps was the only song I knew. And the place just broke down laughing hysterically. I didn't know if they were laughing at me or with me, but after this incredibly difficult crossing, it was like the perfect end to what was the perfect voyage.
Can you talk about your first long voyage and how did you sort of keep busy at sea?
Well, I was a teacher for 8 years, so we would get these long summer holidays that were 3 months. I want to go to Australia because I know there's a P&O ship that always leaves in the middle of June, which is right after the school closed. And I said, that really, really intrigues me. And I'm going to go from New York to Sydney, and I'm not going to get on an airplane. So I went across the country by train to San Francisco. And then one of my roommates in college picked me up. And then 2 days later, I got on the ship, and it was called the SS Orsova. So I got on the ship, and it was full of Australians. And then I went up on deck, and I noticed that, people were getting together for this rope ring that you threw across the net. It's like a tennis game, it's singles and doubles. And I ended up, playing that every single day, morning and afternoon. It was San Francisco to Sydney. It was 21 days. You really had a wonderful feeling of being very healthy because we were doing sports like this every day. And you were meeting people, and there was a pool of people who wanted to play. It was just wonderful. And the captain came out and played. And Captain Chester only had one eye. And you know how he lost the other eye? Playing this game. A rope ring is really hard. It hit him in the eye. And then the other officers, when they had their time off, because they saw this neat group of passengers, and we just played and played and played. It was wonderful. And I was really sad when the voyage was over.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the crossing the line ceremony is and what was your experience?
The Union Castle trip. And Union Castle was a line that sailed between Britain and South Africa. And it had sailings for 101 years until it packed up. And it was a mail ship company and carrying a lot of cargo and also carrying passengers. There was a slogan that almost everybody in England knew because you saw it all over the place when they advertised. A Union Castle mail ship leaves Southampton, Cape Town, and Durban every Thursday at 4:00. It was that clockwork kind of thing. I was the only American on board. I'd done a round the world trip on 8 different ships. And I went to South Africa and I decided I was going to go home on the Union Castle because it was so well known. Because there was all this cargo space, when they covered up the holes, there were vast decks. And we spent so much time outdoors because the weather was so nice. And the purser came to me one day and he said, good going. You won the ping pong tournament. Now I'm going to make you pay for that. He said, we're going to cross the line in 2 days. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, we're crossing the equator. And I said, okay. And he said, well, there's a ceremony we do, and I want you to be one of the victims. And I said, well, what is it all about? And he said, well, I don't really want to spoil it for you. It'll be a little rough, but do you accept? And I said, sure, I accept. So I was nervous for the next couple of days. I didn't want to ask anybody about it, so I wanted to be surprised. And so what happened was there were 4 of us. We were lined up next to the pool. We're roped together, and King Neptune is next to us, and he reads out things that we have done during the crossing, and you're going to have to pay for it. And mine was raiding the beer larder or whatever it was. And so you're going to be off your beer. The bartender isn't going to give you any beer after this. If you survive the ceremony, you can go back to normal life. So then my turn came to be dragged around the pool and put on what was an operating table, with somebody dressed up as a nurse, somebody dressed up as a doctor, and all these instruments. And then they covered me with a sheet, and they got out the ketchup to look like blood, and they brought out a knife, and they went underneath the sheet, and you could see the blood on the sheet from the inside, and sort of roughed me up a little bit, roll over, and it did some more work on my back and so on. And then the next step was you went around to the other side of the pool and you got into a barber's chair, and the barber's chair backed up to the swimming pool. So my back was to the swimming pool. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'd never seen one of these before. The crowd was just getting all excited. I mean, everybody was out on deck watching this. And a barber comes out with these big wooden shears and starts chopping at my hair and all that kind of stuff, and then told me to turn around. And he said, you need a shave. And he brought out, something to look like a knife. You had to be very careful not to move. And then he had a little lever on the bottom of the barber's chair, and I was flipped over backwards into the swimming pool where there were London bobbies inside dressed as bears. And so they got a hold of me and they sank me for about 30 seconds down at the bottom. And then I was allowed to come up. And when I came up, there was, just huge roars of laughter and cheering. And it was an amazing experience. It's the kind of thing that's not done anymore on most cruise ships. They will do it with crew members, but they won't do it with passengers because of the liability. But it was so much fun. It was the real thing. And I saw it again a couple of times on British ships, and each purser had a different way of doing it. I was known all around the ship, which was kind of fun. Oh, you're the one. Oh, right. You were such a good sport.
I've been traveling on ships, I guess, since the 1950s, cruises and crossings. Quite honestly, in those early years, there was not that much to do on board the ship, especially during a crossing. So, yes, I played ping pong and shuffleboard and quoits, not professionally, but recreationally. These days, it's mostly trivia, which I really look forward to. We usually travel with a group of friends. So we are oftentimes our own team. If it's just my wife and myself, we'll join other teams, and it's a way of socializing and meeting people. I look forward to those days at sea where you can have as many as 3 sessions of trivia a day. So between meals and trivia and a concert here and there, your day is full.
Can you talk about the voyages in the 50s?
My first crossing was on the old New Amsterdam, and that was in 1961 on a team tour. I think the way we kept busy was sneaking into first class and being thrown out. Actually, we did a lot of swimming. There were indoor swimming pools on the early ships, and so you could swim in any kind of weather. As far as trivia goes, I can't even remember the first time that it was offered on board. I think there were like pub quizzes on Cunard, and at first, it was fun to play because you really got good stuff. I remember one trip we did, we met another couple and we became a group, a team of 4. And we were so good at it that by the end of 12 or 13 days, we had amassed this amazing amount of mugs and T-shirts and pens. And so we went up to the Lido deck on the ship and spread the whole thing out and took a picture.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
My pleasure.